One of the overlooked consequences of the Second World War is how ordinary civilians were forced to navigate extreme bureaucratic oppression while maintaining the basic necessities of life. During the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands, the requisitioning of livestock was a constant threat. Official records often focus on German policies and economic extraction, but what is rarely examined in depth is how Dutch families, farmers, and urban households alike adapted to preserve their food, income, and survival under occupation. Hiding livestock was not a romantic or heroic act in the conventional sense. It was a methodical, often dangerous response to a system designed to deprive them. Families converted barns, sheds, and fields into concealment zones. Dutch farmers adapted existing structures, building false walls or hidden compartments in barns. Floorboards were lifted, walls were reinforced with hay bales, and lofts were modified to house smaller livestock. In some cases, fields adjacent to the farm were repurposed as temporary pastures behind natural cover, rows of trees, ditches, or embankments that made animals less visible from the air or to passing patrols. This required careful planning. Animals had to be accessible for feeding and milking, but protected from observation. Families coordinated schedules to move livestock during low visibility times, often at dawn or dusk. The work was continuous and physically demanding, revealing how survival under occupation extended beyond immediate combat zones into everyday labor. Hiding livestock was not limited to rural areas. In cities and towns, smaller animals, particularly chickens, rabbits, and goats, were concealed in courtyards, basements, and even attic spaces. Families developed systems to ensure animals received food and water without attracting attention. Rabbits were fed kitchen scraps, chickens were let out under the cover of early morning fog, and noise was carefully managed. These strategies highlight a key dimension of civilian survival: the ability to adapt standard agricultural knowledge to unconventional environments. It also emphasizes the constant negotiation between safety and sustenance, a reality that official narratives often overlook. Survival was rarely an individual effort. Families relied on trusted neighbors and local networks to rotate responsibilities, share feed, and alert one another to inspections or patrols. In some regions, entire villages coordinated strategies to minimize detection, using signals to indicate when German personnel were approaching. This cooperative approach reflects a practical understanding of risk management. While the Nazi regime enforced strict penalties, including fines or imprisonment, the social cohesion of rural and semi-rural communities mitigated exposure and increased the likelihood that livestock, and by extension food, would survive. Beyond barns and cellars, Dutch civilians used natural camouflage to conceal their animals. Brush, straw, and tarps were deployed in patterns that broke up outlines visible from ground level or aerial observation. Some families even adapted elements of ornamental horticulture, using hedges, gardens, and trellises to shield small livestock. These efforts reveal that survival under occupation was as much about observation management as it was about food security. Controlling what could be seen, rather than simply hiding, became a fundamental tactic. Hiding livestock was not solely a logistical challenge. Civilians also had to navigate the threat posed by informants and collaborators. German authorities relied on local intelligence to locate contraband food and animals. Families developed countermeasures, including rotating caretakers, altering feeding schedules, and even moving animals between multiple locations to avoid detection. This constant state of vigilance had long-term consequences: psychological stress, mistrust, and, honestly, just the sheer energy required to maintain concealment influenced daily life, showing that survival under occupation was not just physical, but, intensely cognitive. Maintaining livestock under wartime conditions demanded a lot of improvisation. Since access to traditional fodder was limited, families turned instead to kitchen waste, foraged plants, and, even weeds. Veterinary care, which was often unavailable, relied on homemade remedies and just basic knowledge of animal health. Families had to monitor symptoms closely and isolate sick animals to prevent outbreaks that really could wipe out entire hidden stocks. Despite careful planning, many animals were confiscated, died from inadequate care, or were lost due to environmental exposure. Yet the strategies developed during the occupation informed later practices in both emergency preparedness and post-war agriculture. The combination of concealment, social coordination, and improvisation became a model for resilient resource management under extreme conditions. Dutch civilians were not fighting in conventional terms, but their actions reflect a sophisticated understanding of survival under systemic threat. Studying how Dutch civilians preserved livestock under Nazi occupation forces us to reconsider the broader impacts of war. Civilians are not passive observers, they are active agents shaping their own survival. Recognizing these experiences allows us to appreciate how ordinary people managed extraordinary pressures and offers practical insights into resilience, resource management, and emergency planning. If this examination of civilian survival resonates, consider subscribing to Backyard Wisdom and sharing this video. Understanding how communities endure extreme conditions is as relevant now as it was during World War II. These forgotten stories remind us that human ingenuity and cooperation often determine survival more than strategy alone.